audio is working. Welcome to Topics in American Literature, class number 6. I'm Mr. Smith. It's the spring 2022 semester at Tennessee Tech. This is America is a Mixtape in Topics in American Literature. And so the folk revival, pop culture-wise, in my generation, really got going again in 2000. I was already listening to folk music in the 1990s, but if you can think about the 1990s, that was, Green Day and Nirvana. It was grunge, it was hard rock, it was metal, it was hip hop, it was pop. There was not a huge folk revival in the 90s like we saw in the aughts and the teens. And this film, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, really amplified the folk revival and the traditional music revival in the United States. Some of the great music in there included one track, O Lazarus, that was taken from a field recording made by Alan Lomax and his father, John Lomax. And as we're going to find out, some of these field recordings were done in such a way that the man making the field recording was broke as a joke. He didn't have any money. He did have the equipment. He had the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian helping him, but they were not able to pay the artists. Well, when Oh Brother, Where Art Thou's album became a best-selling album, the people who were stewards of the Alan Lomax Trust at that point were able to go and find the singer who was part of a prison work crew back when this field recording was made inside of a jail, and it was a work crew, and they were able to go and find the living remnant of that work crew and give him a royalty check from a song he made from a field recording back in the middle of the 20th century. When Alan Lomax and his dad, John Lomax, would drive around and go to churches like the ones that we saw in the videos at the top of the class, churches, jails, fields, juke joints, wherever humans of the South, of Appalachia and the Deep South were making music, Alan and John Lomax would be there to make a recording. The 1930s, as you probably already know, were the Great Depression, and John Steinbeck wrote his epic book called Grapes of Wrath, which was a bestseller. And then there was a movie called Grapes of Wrath. And so there was kind of like a pop culture snowball with the Grapes of Wrath. And so Alan Lomax benefited from that by creating one of the first big folk music revival concerts coming out of the popularity of the Grapes of Wrath, which I'll mention here in a little while. And it will speak to the cultural giant that Alan Lomax was, but he was kind of mostly a behind the scenes guy. He did actually sing and play guitar, and he did actually cut some albums. I actually have an album of him singing, and I was scared to put it on because I was afraid that he wouldn't be any good, but he's actually quite good. And so if you listen to the radio show, you're actually going to not only hear a lot of the music that Alan Lomax and our topic for Wednesday, Harry Smith, collected, you also get to hear Alan Lomax himself singing. And so the folk revival precedes rock and roll. And so in the 30s, you really had the bustle was what they called hillbilly blues, and mostly hillbilly and blues, and then religious records as well. And all of that swirls together. So country, what they called hillbilly, the blues, what they called race records, and gospel music, it all swirled together. And there's folk music comes out of that, and rock and roll. And the major difference between folk and rock and roll, but though this would be quite fighting words by the mid-60s when Bob Dylan was controversial about this, but it will be talked about. We get to Dylan a little bit later in the term, but the big controversy was it an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar? I guarantee you guys have already figured out that there's bigger controversies in America than whether you play an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar. But in the folk community, traditional music, old time music, they really like the acoustic instruments that don't need to be amplified. And in the field recordings, Lomax would go and take recordings of people in the field just as they would sing, like they would sing in their homes, in their churches, in the juke joints, and just like at a barbecue at a state park and that kind of thing. You probably know a little bit about the lineage of recording technology, but maybe not a lot about the lineage of recording technology. And so what do you listen to? You can drop these in the chat if you want. What do you listen to music on? What do you prefer to listen to music with, or how do you listen to music today? I listen to music almost exclusively today, not entirely. I have all kinds of other physical Right. And what do you listen to it on? Do you listen to it on your phone, or what do you listen to, your Apple Music or your Spotify? I listen to my Apple Music. I don't listen to Apple Music. I listen to my Spotify on my telephone, occasionally on the computer, but almost always on the phone with my Bose Bluetooth headphones, right? So lots of you listen to your phone, sometimes the computer. Just a short while ago, if you wanted to listen to digital music, it wasn't happening on your phone. It was because of that you were listening to it on an iPod or an MP3 player. I still have one of my MP3 players I bought during the wave of the MP3 player in the aughts. And then right before that, it was CDs on CD players. And you had to go to the store and buy a physical CD. And you are, putting the CD in the CD player. And before CDs, it was vinyl 33 albums, 33 long playing albums, vinyl. Well, back in the day, it was shellac. Shellac were the old 78 records. And I'm really excited that the pictures I have here is an old hand crank Victrola that my friend Larry in Cookeville has, that he bought. And he's kind of a retro guy like me. And I watched him hand crank it and play an old shellac record on an hand crank Victrola. And that's an old 78 record. And I finally got my hands on a few 78s. Now, one of my many turntables, I actually just gave one of my turntables to a teenager that's a friend of mine's daughter who's starting her record collection, because I have too much stuff, too much junk. And so I passed along a turntable, an amplifier, and some speakers to this teenager, and they're going to start the next generation of music fandom. But I have my big system at the house, but I've got this little kind of desktop, ordered it off of Amazon 20 years ago, 10 years ago, turntable that does have a 78 setting on it. It's nothing high fidelity, but I can listen to my 78s on that. I've got them in my office now, at that turntable in my office at Tech and Henderson Hall. But these are actual 78 records, and that I took pictures of the players. So these are not downloaded from Google Docs. I actually took them. There you can see it was 35 cents to buy that record. 35 cents. That was a lot of money back in the 30s, I imagine, to go and buy a 78 for 35 cents. So the technology has come a long way. The 78 is going to come back again on next Monday when I talk to you about the author Amanda Petrusis, and it's definitely going to come into effect. And this idea of what is old is better and what is authentic is better is going to come into play heavily when we read the book White Tears by Hari Kunzru, which is a mind-blowing novel about the popularity of roots music, and it takes a very kind of disturbing kind of turn. And you have to remember, it's a novel, it's fiction, it's kind of almost in the realm of the fantastic, but that's the novel. That's the only homework you have right now, is to be reading White Tears, which I believe we get to middle of next week. A few lines of poetry. A vast throng of Negro workaday singers, mirrors of a race, working men in the southern United States, from highway, construction camp, from railroad and farm, from city and countryside, 1 million strong. 500,000 migrants from the south, eastward, northward, westward, and some south again. Negro offenders in 1,000-fold in local jails, county chain gangs, state and federal prisons. A horde of southern casual laborers and wanderers down that lonesome road. A brown-black army of bad men, creepers and ramblers and jamboree breakers, traveling men, deluxe. Itinerant, full-handed musicianers, music physicianers, songsters, singly, in pairs, quartets, always moving on. A host of women workers from field and home and factory at once, and subjects of the lonesome blues. America was a land of song, and that's what Alan Lomax and his family set out to figure out, to learn about, was the folk culture and the folk song of America in the 30s. And keeping in mind, during the Depression, you had a lot of hobos. And so you had, this is before Jack Kerouac and On the Road, where they actually had a car. These are people are hopping freight trains, and they're living, in just in a sleeping bag they could roll out on the ground. They traveled, everything they could own was on their backs. It was a time of great adventure. America, at the beginning of the 20th century, was a land of great hope, but it was also a land of great troubles already. We'd had World War I, we'd had the flu pandemic, we'd have, goodness gracious, prohibition, and all of the bootleggers and moonshiners of prohibition, and then the Great Depression and World War II. So Alan Lomax was a man of the 20th century who documented, and recorded all of this incredible stuff. Alan Lomax is our topic for today here in Topics in American Literature. America is a mixtape. Is it a mixtape? I hope it's a mixtape. I hope that the proposition, if you will, of this course is kind of sticking. I've already started to get a few emails from your classmates about this proposition. I'm going to read you this quote by Alan Lomax, specifically talking about African American music. I hope you may be ready now to listen to the Negro songs with different ears. These songs are full of love for people. They are lonely for people, and they are full of hunger for gentleness and kindness in the world. These songs rose up out of slavery, out of misery. They jumped up out of levee camps. They sprang from turpentine camps and back alleys. The people became happy and made them up in churches. The people got high and made them up at dances. They rose up out of tough people and good people. Some of these people were so mad that they could kill you as soon as they look at you. And when some of these people had the quiet blues, they were so quiet you could hear them think for miles away. Some of these people could look past poverty and misery. They could look clear through the darkness and despair and ignorance and see something on the other side. The old folks used to say, on the other side of the Jordan River. These songs rose up out of these people without their having to think about it, because they were lonesome for more kindness and goodness and richness than they could find in life right where they are. I was talking to somebody who had a pretty privileged, background. Somebody in the chat used the word bougie. Yes, yeah. I was talking to somebody who had it pretty bougie, and we got into this whole conversation about church and the focus on heaven. And the thing about it is I think heaven is here. If we'll allow it and if we'll make it, but it's a complicated topic, right? And I think one of the reasons why in old traditional working class religion, white and black religion here in the South, there's such a focus on over yonder in the streets of gold, is because it's a hard life. It can be a hard life for the working class in this land we call America. So today we're talking about the great American song hunter, Alan Lomax, and he believed we as a land was learning to listen to itself. And I've taken him at his word, and I am an Americanist. I love other cultures and other musics that come from other societies, but I'm obsessed with, as he was, with American music. This is something that was called The Other America, and we'll get to Dylan later. But when we talk about Harry Smith on Wednesday, it was in response to Harry Smith that the American rock critic Greil Marcus referred to this as the old weird America. But definitely you hear echoes of that in the field recordings of Alan Lomax. If your ear is trained to listen to only to contemporary pop music or only to classical music, the roots music that comes out of the fields and the workhouses and the jails and the churches of the Old South is definitely a different kind of music. It's got some kind of a mysterious power, and I think it's the dirt under the fingernails. I think it might be the well water. It might be the cornbread. It might be the soul food that they were eating. It might be the way your grandma would cook collard greens. There's something in it. There's something powerful in the music that makes it sound that way. From Austin, Texas. I don't know if we got any Longhorns up in this place, but he's from Austin, Texas. And he was mentored by his father, who was a song collector and was really into cowboy songs. He was a folklorist, an archivist, a writer, a scholar, a political activist, an oral historian, and filmmaking. There really wasn't anything that this guy didn't try. And he was a polymath. He was a generalist within musicology, or what some people call ethnomusicology. Within this thing, he was an everything and anything all at the same time kind of guy. Wildly talented Alan Lomax. The Alan Lomax collection contains approximately 650 linear feet of manuscripts, 6,400 sound recordings, 5,500 graphic images, 6,000 moving images of material created and collected by Alan Lomax and others in their work documenting song, music, dance, and body movement. There's an Alan Lomax Archive YouTube page. There's a podcast by an amazing musician from Louisville, Kentucky by the name of Nathan Salzberg, who will come up again on my Monday lecture next Monday about Amanda Petrusic, the great American rock critic who now works for the New Yorker, lives in the Catskill area of New York, moved out of Brooklyn, moved from Brooklyn to the Catskills during the pandemic. I think that was a good move on her part. But Nathan Salzberg does the Alan Lomax podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts. I highly recommend somebody taking me up on this rabbit hole, maybe even for their mixtape. Alan Lomax is being described by his biographer, John Zed here, as intense, passionate, in and out of love, dependent on others, but often resistant to them when they got close. He could get by on little money, lived an unsettled life, drift out of his times at one moment, but then come back again, deeply involved. He worked like a dog, driving himself until he fell asleep in the middle of a recording session in the waiting room of an office, but only for moments, as life to him was too long not to fill the time with curiosity. He took on more than was humanly possible and paid for it in frustration over his incomplete projects. Now, there is a critique of Alan Lomax that when he was doing the field recordings, that there may have been a kind of a paternalistic or exploitive, of the educated, white guy with a recording studio in the trunk of his car, traveling around, to these very dirt poor areas all over the South and just collecting these songs. But I believe that that Alan Lomax had a deep respect for these musicians and a deep respect for the complicated race and class context out of what they came. And reading his biography, which I just finished, this incredible biography. And it's interesting, the guy who wrote it is going to go write a bio on, Harry Smith later. He shows that Alan Lomax never was successful, scare quotes around the word successful, in the ways that we as a society have come to value. He never got a tenured position in academia. He was always on the fringes of academia. He got in and out of academia. He was friends with people like Margaret Mead. He kind of dabbled in the official academia. He kind of dabbled in the music industry. He did get some gainful employment from the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian, but it wasn't completely steady. And he really generally lived close to the edge his entire life. And he had to write his own grants to get grants to do this stuff, hustle money from people to help him do this stuff. And when he was doing it, it cost money to drive your car around the South and eat in restaurants and, things like this, stay in boarding houses and hotels and whatnot, that he lived a raw, rambling American life. And he doesn't probably have a ton of fame. I mean, I bet nobody on the call was like completely aware of Alan Lomax before today's call. If you were, please tell me. I want to know that if you were already aware of Alan Lomax. One of the hugest discoveries of Alan Lomax, and this is probably where some of the criticisms that there might have been, some white savior criticisms of the Lomaxes coming in and promoting was around the fame of Leadbelly. Leadbelly had been convicted of murder, was in jail. They found him in jail. They recorded his music. They, as far as I know, stayed friends with Leadbelly, but when he got out of jail, he was never a superstar. His music is out there to listen to, and it's been re-recorded by many people. Songs like the Midnight Special and the like. But there is kind of an awkward, if you're like the prison warden and these, professor types, with a nice car, probably bespectacled, come to your prison and say, I'd like to record music, for documentary purposes. I mean, it's interesting that I don't know that the prisons would let them do that today. I don't know if any prisons are doing this anymore. And I don't know if the guys in the prison who would want to do it, maybe they have, a slam poetry class in the joint, but I bet they're not doing this kind of thing anymore. So the Lomaxes in the 30s take their new state-of-the-art aluminum disc recorder that they had brought from the Library of Congress to the Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana, and they had previously been recording the work groups, the singing work crews. They found Leadbelly, and they went back a few weeks later and made an album of Leadbelly right there in the prison. Really incredible Really, really incredible stories. And the music of Lead Belly is classic, amazing American music. When he was just 20 years old and still a student at the University of Texas, Mary Elizabeth Barnacle and Zora Neale Hurston went on a road trip with him. Now, let's just get the dynamics of this together. And this is something like you could imagine if some of you are doing a summer internship. It could be a southern, it could be a northern, eastern, western internship. But if you're doing a summer internship, he was in charge. He had gotten the permission to do this from the Library of Congress. Well, somehow he ended up hanging out with these two middle-aged white women intellectuals, Zora Neale Hurston and Mary Barnacle. This is in the 30s. One woman white, one woman black, both in their 40s. He's in their 20s. Now, there's no documentation of this, but the author does seem to drop the hint of the biography that maybe these women really fancied young Alan. So this is very complicated. And then, one of the most offensive things of this period is when white people would dress up like black people. It was called blackface. It's now considered to be completely unacceptable and not a good idea. Well, Zora Neale Hurston decided, the African-American of the three, decided to encourage Alan and Mary to paint their faces to go into a particular situation. And she said it wasn't to protect them. And Alan didn't want to do it. He knew it might be offensive to the black folks, but she was trying to do it to hide them from the cops because it was these two older women and they were a mixed race group and they were traveling in a car together and they were staying, in lodgings together all through the South. In the 30s, they could have gotten beat up or gotten in worse trouble, but their mission, their love of collecting songs, got them to do this. And I remember getting the book, and I was, I kind of liked Alan Lomax. I kind of knew a little bit about him, but I got the biography, such an incredible read. And then when I got to this chapter about his travels with Zora Neale Hurston and Mary Barnacle, I was like, this dude is my guy. I love this guy. He's so bold, and he don't care. He has none to give, if you know what I'm saying. And Zora Neale Hurston was a literary giant. She is a giant of African American literature. Her Eyes Are Watching God, or Their Eyes Are Watching God, great important book. And she had a whole book about folklore and about folk song in the African American community. So here he is also not just getting to travel with these folks, but he's being mentored by one of the giants of African American literature. And then throughout his career, he would rub shoulders with the greatest of the great. I mean, Lead Belly alone, just to be in the original recording sessions with his dad of Lead Belly, that's enough to catapult this guy into epic. He is epic status already, but it's just really kind of incredible. He had this to say about the religious music that he would record, and you heard the religious music that I played at the top of the class. He said, were it possible for the world to stop and listen, the world would stop and listen. And I hope you will stop and take some time to listen to that SoundCloud I made and go and do some digging, on your own to these kinds of musics, because he believes that this kind of old-timey religious music were the songs that awakened the eschatology stored in the inner ear and engaged the whole body. So he believes, eschatology is that word that Reverend Moss used last week, but it's the music of, the book of Revelation of John the Revelator. It's the music of the second coming in on the clouds. This is like reality shattering music. And he believes that all of us have an eschatology stored in our ears. And this is the kind of music that will awaken it. I just get chill bumps thinking about it. And I know that I've been inspired by music in that way. And if you don't, at the course of this semester, have at least one moment where the hairs on your arm stand up because you're listening to that right song at that right time. I really hope a lot of you will have that kind of a moving experience. He launched folk music in response to the Grapes of Wrath on March 3rd, 1940. That's when the great Pete Seeger met the great Woody Guthrie. We'll talk a lot about Woody Guthrie on Friday in a Grapes of Wrath themed benefit for migrant workers. Also on the bill were Burl Ives, Aunt Molly Jackson, Josh White, and others. Allen declared this the birth of the folk revival. Woody Guthrie wrote This Land Is Your Land and so many other great songs, and we'll talk about him on Friday. But he was a wild, wild child. And apparently, when he stayed with Alan Lomax, Alan thought he was fronting. He was trying to be a little bit too rugged, and apparently showed up from a rainstorm, maybe drunk. I know that Woody struggled with alcohol addiction. and climbed into bed at Alan's apartment in his wet, soggy clothes and dirty boots, you know. And I think Alan, you know, wanted Woody to, you know, admit that you can clean up a little bit. You can still be that tough guy, that tough rambling guy, you know, but you can clean up, you know, a little bit too. But this is this 1940 concert is like one of those things you wish you could have been there, the day that Pete Seeger met Woody Guthrie. And hopefully, if you've never heard of either of those names, you will know a lot more about them, along with, you know, Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead, and some of the names you might have heard of by the end of the semester. And he still continued, even though he never reached like stratospheric success, he continued to be successful. In 1977, we sent out a couple of spaceships called the Voyagers. Matter of fact, one of those 1977 Voyagers is still out there broadcasting in outer space. And they asked Alan Lomax to put a gold-plated copper disc on that album, or to help them decide what music to put on the gold-plated copper disc that contains sound and images selected to portray the diversity of life and culture on Earth. Sounds of the Earth includes 115 images, a variety of natural sounds, and 90 minutes of musical selections from different cultures and eras, curated by Alan Lomax and spoken greetings from Earth people in 55 languages. Alan Lomax got to make the mixtape, like your playlist that you're making for this class. He made the mixtape that went on the Voyager on a gold-plated disc. That's who this guy is, Alan Lomax. He was toward the end of his career, and by the way, in the 50s, he traveled all over the world. He actually was worried that America was unfavorable to him. You've heard of the whole McCarthy scare, I hope, in your history classes, where people who were so-called, put scare quotes around this, communist, Ms. Wright spoke about this a little bit on Friday, were being harassed, and sometimes they couldn't work. Well, anyway, he was very chilled by that time period, and he had been investigated for his activism, but they never found anything. He was mainly a music guy, and he might have been friends or friends of people that were so-called subversives, but he was a pretty straight arrow in many ways. And so they never had any goods on him, but he still felt it was time to kind of shake off his nativism and go and see the world. So he traveled all over Europe for many years doing the same thing. And he became a song collector of the world. And he was greeted as kind of a hero in the United Kingdom. He had his own BBC radio show. He did one Christmas Day broadcast on the BBC, which was the sounds of Christmas, and it was him going around and finding really obscure folk music of Christmas from all over United Kingdom and such. But he started toward the end of his career saying that we needed a global jukebox, and he was going to provide the global jukebox. Well, you know, your Spotify today and your Apple Music today, these are the global jukebox to which he spoke. So I think he, in a way, was kind of a prophetic voice. He foresaw the greatness, that the treasure trove that a place like Spotify would be for finding new music. So that'll conclude my remarks on Alan Lomax. We've got a couple minutes on the call, so I really encourage you all, as I will try to do at the end of these, you know, long lectures. I'm doing a lot of lecturing at this first